Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to see a great crowd here for what I think is a pretty important discussion this afternoon. My name is Jacinta, for those of you I haven't met. There's a few people in the room who I don't know, and I'm the Director of the Graduate Centre in Governance and International Affairs here in the School of Political Science and International Studies. We run a kind of an ad hoc series which we call Flashpoint, which are roundtables on contemporary key issues that are happening in politics, international relations, and we bring together people who've got sort of expertise in the area to speak, give short presentations on the particular issue, give their perspectives on them, and then open up for discussion and comments. And that gives us a forum to actually be on top of contemporary issues that are happening both in Australia and internationally. And we just felt completely impelled that we had to do something on the Nauru files. So our panel today is going to consist of Associate Professor Shahar Hameiri, Dr. Phil Orchard and Matt McDonald, and I'll introduce a little bit what they're going to be saying in just a few minutes. But my task in chairing this session is also just to provide us a little bit of background. I'm sure we're all sort of fairly familiar with the idea of the Nauru files, but let me just situate ourselves before we go into the detail. So the Nauru files relate to the two camps which are run by private companies, Broad Spectrum, with subcontracting out to Wilson Security, which are run on behalf of the Australian Department of Immigration and Border Protection. They're part of Australia's response to asylum seekers, legal maritime arrivals, as part of a mandatory detention centre. As we know, this policy of putting people in camps in Nauru was instigated back in 2001 under John Howard's government as part of the Pacific Solution. The camps were closed in 2008 under Kevin Rudd's prime ministership, but then reopened again with growing numbers of illegal maritime arrivals in 2012 by the Gillard government. The two camps currently host some 440 people at a cost of something like $1.2 billion a year. There are asylum seekers from a range of different places, Rohingya people from Myanmar, Syria, Afghanistan, a range of other areas as well. On average, the average period of detention is 445 days, but just under 25% of people have been held for 770 days there, which is 2 years. And one of the problems of the Nauru Detention Centre is the uncertainty of when people will be processed and when they'll be released from detention, and the uncertainty then of where they will go. Since part of the mandatory detention policy, the government has assured people that no asylum seekers, even if they're proven to be refugees, will be resettled in Australia. So from the outset, the Nauru camps have been under criticism. From a very basic perspective, they've been criticised for the basic health facilities, the lack of education facilities, overcrowded conditions, poor housing conditions, and water shortages. There's also been criticism of the psychological uncertainty that detainees face, looking at protracted and uncertain periods of time of detention. One report says there is a concentration camp feel to the detention centres. There have also been serious concerns about abuse, assault, violence within the camps, particularly sexual assault, rape, and self-harm, suicide, sewing lips together, people drinking bleach, a range of appalling things such as this. And of course the detention of children. Currently there's some 68 children held in detention in Nauru. The camps have had very limited and controlled access from the media, so it's been very hard to actually get reports and details of what's actually happening within there. And there's also been constraints on people who've been working in the camps and speaking publicly. In 2012, an Amnesty International report described the situation as a toxic mix of uncertainty, unlawful detention, and inhumane conditions. This sets the scene, I think, for the Nauru files. So on the 10th of August, the Guardian newspaper published a cache of more than 2,000 leaked documents. These were incident reports written by professional staff, guards, teachers, caseworkers, working in the Nauru detention centres, and they cover the periods between May 2013 and October 2015. The release files have been heavily redacted, names, etc. have been taken out, but the range of reports go from the very minor, kids falling over in the playground, to serious, very serious reports of assault, sexual abuse, self-harm, child abuse, and very poor living conditions. What is really disturbing is that of the more than 2,000 reports, more than 50% relate to children, incidents relating to children, even though children are only 18% of the population of the camp. The response of the government has been that since 2015 that it seeks to make the camps a safe place, and that it is working with the Nauru government to ensure safety in the camps, particularly child protection. The response to the Nauru files was, on the one hand, arguing that the allegations of assault were unproven. They were allegations and had been unproven, and that it was seeking to respond to issues raised in a sensitive and timely manner. And all allegations are referred to the Nauruan police force. So effectively, really stating that this is an issue of the Nauruan government to me. In a recent speech by Richard Flanagan, the novelist, just a couple of nights ago, he called the Nauru files an extraordinary trove of anonymous short stories that will continue to be read long after his work. And I quote, "Everything has been done to dehumanise asylum seekers. Their names and their stories are kept from us. They live in a zoo of cruelty. Their lives are stripped of meaning. And they confront this tyranny, our Australian tyranny, with the only thing not taken from them, their bodies. In their meaningless world, in acts seemingly futile and doomed, they assert the fact that their lives still have meaning." Now, I don't know about you, but that phrase actually gives me goosebumps when I've actually read it. So today we want to unpack the Nauru files. Shahar Hameiri, who, as I said, is an associate professor here in Pulsis and also associate director of the Grad Centre, is going to speak to us about Australia's engagement in the Pacific to try and explain what the Nauru camps are and how they come about. Dr. Phil Orchard, also a member of Pulsis, is an expert in people movements, in refugees and in the asylum seeker. And he's going to speak to us generally about the refugee regime. And Phil will speak first, followed by Shahar. And Matt McDonald, Associate Professor Matt McDonald, also member of Pulsis team here, is an expert in Australian foreign policy. And he's going to speak about what the Nauru files mean in Australian politics. Okay, that's my 7 minutes up. So each speaker will speak for about 7 minutes, and then that will allow us time to go to commentary and question and answer. So please, Phil, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and I'll move over here since I'm, I think, the one person with a PowerPoint. Now, as Cindy mentioned, I'm going to be talking more generally about the global refugee regime, and in particular the ongoing challenges that we see around the Syrian refugees and refugee movements to Europe. Because, of course, while the Nauru files are important, fundamentally important issue, today also marks the one-year anniversary of Alan Kurdi's death. The image, of course, of him that was broadcast around the world and seen, at least, or perceived to open up a period of additional compassion, a period of compassion towards refugees, which has effectively shut down. So, of course, the Mediterranean issues have not disappeared, even though the media coverage on them over the last year has significantly declined. Many of you might have seen stories reflecting that just earlier this week we saw some 6,000 migrants rescued in a single day. This was widely broadcast. This movement doesn't represent a new crisis, but simply that climactic conditions are very good for crossing the Mediterranean right now. But of course, the Syrian crisis itself continues, in addition to the Mediterranean crisis. Syria having produced over 4 million refugees, almost 5 million refugees, and some 6.2 million internally displaced persons. Now, the important thing when we talk about Syria is to remember that to this day, the vast majority of these refugees remain within their country of origin. So we still have about 2.7 million refugees in Turkey, about 1 million refugees in Lebanon, reflecting about 25% of the total Lebanese population. We also have about 650,000 refugees in Jordan and about 250,000 refugees today in Iraq. Now, the Mediterranean crossing is not only Syrian refugees. In fact, as UNHCR estimates, about 81% of the total arrivals are coming from 10 refugee-producing countries. But they've seen, particularly this year, that the decline of people coming from refugee-producing countries has declined has fallen. So they estimate that this year, for example, it's been about 64% are from refugee-producing countries. They use this to signify the fact that these are people who haven't had their claims processed. We don't know if they're refugees or not, but the fact that they're coming from significant refugee-producing countries suggests that they may very well be refugees. So we've seen about 281,000 people arrive so far this year, and about 3,200 people have died making this crossing. In addition, as I'll be talking about in a few moments, we've seen a significant shift in the migratory patterns. So whereas last year we saw large-scale movements from Turkey over to Greece, the EU-Turkey deal has effectively shut down that movement. So the vast majority of refugees today crossing the Mediterranean are either leaving from Turkey, but frequently traveling all the way to Italy, or leaving from Libya and crossing over to Italy. Unfortunately, this is a much more dangerous route. And this is the one reason that even though the numbers of refugees and migrants crossing the Mediterranean have fallen so spectacularly, from over 1 million last year to only less than 300,000 this year, we're still seeing roughly the same number of deaths, because the Italian crossing is more dangerous. As you can see, this is data developed by Heaven Crawley and Nando Sagano, where they point directly to this. The blue being the proportion of arrivals using the Greek route in 2015 and 2016, the red being the arrivals in Italy. As you can see, in 2015, that made up a relatively small portion, but created almost 80% of the deaths in migrants crossing the Mediterranean. This year, we've seen Greek, and this has continued to shut down. These figures are from March. It's gotten even smaller, but we've seen this reflect a much larger percentage of the deaths of people crossing the sea. So in effect, with the EU having successfully shut down the Turkey-Greece Mediterranean crossing route, they're actually contributing to excess deaths of migrants and refugees at sea. What about the other international responses? What is going on? Well, as you've probably seen, of course, there have been widespread commitments for resettlement of Syrian refugees from a number of countries making commitments. And UNHCR arguing that around 10% of the total Syrian refugee population, so some 500,000 people, should be resettled. The problem, however, is while a number of these commitments have been made, many of them are lagging. So, for example, Canada is one of the few countries where they've made a commitment to resettle 25,000 refugees, and last year they've actually resettled 30,136. The US, it was widely reported in the past 2 weeks, has now successfully resettled some 10,000 Syrian refugees. But Australia, having made a pledge last year to resettle 12,000, has so far only taken about 2,000 people. In addition, we've seen the EU's own resettlement schemes blow apart entirely. The EU had introduced 2 schemes, one voluntary, one mandatory for EU countries, designed to transfer refugees within EU countries, particularly transferring them from Greece and Italy onto other EU members. That scheme was supposed to cover 160,000 refugees. So far, we've seen virtually none actually resettled. It's estimated that only about 3,000 refugees have been resettled from Greece. So the scheme has completely failed. In addition, of course, I mentioned the EU-Turkey deal. And this is one of the big issues currently affecting agreements. The EU-Turkey deal that the European Union had made with Turkey back in March basically saw Turkey agree to accept back any asylum seekers who landed in Greece in exchange for a €3 billion payment, fast-track status into the European Union, and a waiver of visa requirements for Turkish citizens. Now, so far, not very many refugees have actually been returned to Turkey, only about 500 or so. And this reflects 2 main issues. Firstly, a number of legal challenges launched both within Greece and more widely across the European Union against the agreement. Virtually, legal opinion on this issue is almost all united, arguing that this deal is in fact in violation of EU law. But in addition, it reflects bureaucratic incapacity on the part of both Greece and the EU generally to actually move people back. So we've seen relatively few transfers. And of course, Turkey itself has become more problematic. Since the coup attempt 2 months ago, we've seen restrictive human rights issues there, in addition to what had been occurring previously, particularly towards the Kurdish population. And there are now concerns, particularly if the EU doesn't implement visa-free travel by October, that Turkey will simply leave the deal entirely, having taken the money. And so what we see, unfortunately, is that the situation hasn't really changed all that much. The Syrian civil war is, of course, ongoing. The emergence of the Islamic State over the last few years has further complicated things. And yet we cannot seem to adequately resettle people out of the region. We cannot cut down the Mediterranean trade, and particularly the Mediterranean debts. And this is, I think, one of the big links between what's happening in Europe and what's happening with Australia. Because, of course, as we saw the development of Nauru and Manus Island, it was designed, the government's argued, to, and I say governments plural because this reflects both the Rudd government and the Abbott and then Turnbull governments, that they were designed to stop deaths at sea. That was the arguments that they were being made. The same arguments are being made with respect to the EU-Turkey deal and respect to a lot of the EU policies. The problem is they're not working. They're not preventing deaths at sea. They're not preventing deaths in other situations, remaining in the countries where you can be targeted for human rights abuses, as well as limiting the outflows from Syria itself, with the result that many people who might have sought asylum or sought to leave the country and claim refugee status elsewhere remain trapped within Syria as internally displaced persons. So I'll end there, given my 7 minutes are up.
Well done.